Hey everybody, I'm here today to show you the custom 6-inch floor transition that I made. And I will be showing you the entire process through the pictures that I had taken when creating this transition, and I'll walk you through it in a step-by-step manner. So the first picture that you see here is basically the entire area that I had to cover. You can see that I had a newly renovated kitchen. So I had renovated my kitchen and I had removed the wall that was separating the kitchen from the living room. So that had created this 5.5 to 6-inch gap that you see there, and I had to create a custom floor transition to cover this gap. And the floor transition had to be good enough so that it would look good, it would be functional, and so that I would be able to put stools where that peninsula is. So here is a little bit of a closer view of the area. Now you can see the area on the right is where the wall was, and over that area where the wall was, I had put some additional subfloor and mortar and a scratch coat, obviously. And the area to the left is where the entrance to the kitchen was. So there was already hardwood flooring there because it was basically a doorway to the kitchen. So this is how I created a custom 6-inch floor transition to cover that area. So I had went to the hardware store and got these pieces of laminate flooring that were sort of close to the coloring of the hardwood floor. And I would obviously cut them to size, but I got these pieces of laminate flooring to create the first part of the transition because it was basically a two-part transition. Then I went to the hardware store and I got these pieces, and these are just standard reducers, and these would form the second part of the transition. This is just a close-up shot of the reducers. They already came pre-stained and uncut. Well, they were cut to a specific size, but it wasn't to the size that I needed them to be. And this is the underside of those reducers, just to show you what they looked like underneath. So I had actually cut the reducers to be the specific width that I had needed, and I had actually needed a third piece, which I will show you in a few moments. So I cut them and then I had sanded them. So this picture shows the reducers that I had sanded along with the third piece that I had cut. And then once I finished sanding them, I had stained them to match the floor. So that's what you're seeing here. Those reducers were basically cut to size, as sanded, and then stained. So this is just a close-up shot of the transition area once again. Now, the thing that I had to deal with at this point was the fact that the area on the right had an additional subfloor and a scratch coat and some mortar on it, so it was slightly higher than the area on the left with the hardwood. So I had to find a way to raise the area on the left to be the same height as the area on the right. So I went and I found these little pieces that you can stack and insert, and I basically glued them down to the hardwood floor to raise the hardwood floor area on the left to be the same area, to be the same height as the area on the right. And this is just a side profile of those little pieces. So I glued them down with some construction adhesive that you can see right here, just some simple no more nails. I glued them into place, and they would allow the entire flooring transition to be the same height. Basically, I evened out the height of the hardwood flooring on the left and the subfloor, scratch coat, and mortar on the right. Once I had done that, I got the pieces, one of the pieces of laminate flooring, and I glued it into place. And you can see that there's one piece of laminate flooring glued into place with some construction adhesive, and then I glued the second piece. So now you can see that I have done the first part of the custom 6-inch transition. The laminate flooring was glued in place, and the laminate flooring is the same height as the tiles. So the laminate flooring is at the same height as the tiling over there. Now the next thing that I did, once I glued all of the laminate flooring into place, was I started gluing, using construction adhesive and gluing the reducer into place. So you can see right here that I had glued the first piece of the reducer in place, and then in the next picture you can see that I had glued all of the pieces of the reducer in place, and both of the parts of the transition are done in a temporary fashion because they are just glued into place. They are not secured down with nails just yet. So it looks pretty good, and basically the laminate flooring is the same height as the tiling, and then the reducer takes down the height from the tiling and laminate flooring to the height of the hardwood flooring. So it's basically a two-part reducer that I had created to cover this 6-inch gap. Okay, well the gap was about 5.5 inches. The entire transition ended up being about 6 inches. So this is a close-up shot of how it looked after the glue had dried and sort of before I put any nails into place. Okay, so the next step was to nail the reducer in place. The actual second part of the transition, that's what I'm speaking of when I'm talking about the reducer. So I nailed the reducer in place, and because the reducer was going over the top of the laminate flooring, and the laminate flooring was underneath the reducer and pushed up against the tiling, I was able to only nail the reducer in place, and those two, the tiling and the reducer, would sort of hold the laminate flooring in place along with the glue that I had used. So I put some nails into the reducer and nailed it into place, and then because I was using a hammer, I had to countersink the nails, so I used a simple hammer and nail punch to countersink the nails. This is what the entire transition had looked like once the nails were in place, and obviously after I had countersunk the nails. Now the next step was to fill in the gap between the laminate flooring and the tiling. So for this I used simple grout that matched the grout that I'd used in the kitchen with that tiling. So I filled in that gap with the grout and allowed it to dry, gave it adequate time to dry, and this is what it had looked like once the grout had completely dried. So you can see it sort of flows right into the tiling and the grout of the kitchen, and it looks pretty seamless, if I do say so myself. Now, because I had countersunk the nails, I had to fill in those countersinking holes. So I used some wood filler to fill in all of the holes and the gaps within the reducer and so forth. You can see right here that I filled in the holes along with the gaps between the individual pieces of reducer. So once those had been filled in, I stained the wood filler to match the reducer so you wouldn't be able to see it. And you can see that I stained obviously the gaps and the holes that were caused from countersinking the nails, along with the gaps between the individual pieces of the reducer. And once I had finished staining everything, the last and final step was to put a clear coat over top of the reducer just to protect the stain and to protect it because there would be stools around it and people would be walking on it. I wanted to protect it. So I put a clear coat on it, and once it was all completely finished, this is what it looked like. Now, it's not perfect by any means, but I do have to say that it does look good, and it is very hard, it is very difficult to cover a 5.5 or 6 inch gap with a flooring transition because stores don't generally sell things that would accommodate this specific situation. So it looks pretty good, and the final steps that I have to take to complete this transition and this area of the kitchen are basically to put the baseboards and quarter rounds in place, paint them, and then get some stools to basically complete this area of the kitchen. So as I said before, it is not perfect by any means, but it definitely looks good, and I had to sort of use some of my own creative juices to put this two-part flooring transition in place. And that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching.